So for anybody that had a brochure that said Emily, I assure you I'm not an Emily Hutchins. She actually was promoted into a different role, and so she couldn't be here today. But I'm sure everybody here is really excited right after a good lunch to get to hear from audit people, because I'm sure that makes your all stomach feel a lot better. But the good thing is I am not an auditor. I don't do math. I've been prohibited from that from this office. So I serve as the chief investigative counsel. My role is a little bit different. So once we have investigations from fraud, waste, or abuse, I'm a former, just a little bit of history. I'm a former prosecutor. For those of you around here, I'm actually from the 4th District. This is my home for up until about 2 years ago. I was an ADA in Jefferson County and worked in Sevier County as well. So I get to come back home for this. So it's kind of fun. But that's my background. And what my job is to take these investigations that we do and review them and look through and see, is there any criminal activity, potential criminal activity? Is it something we need to refer to a DA's office? Because we're required by statute not only to publish a public report, which I'll talk a little bit more about, but we also have to turn over criminal activity to a district attorney or the attorney general, whatever enforcement agency it involves. So that's kind of my role. And so this presentation is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to have some cases up here. I've taken all the names out. These are all cases divisions. We were 12 until just a few weeks ago. And those range from local government audit, state audit. They're the ones that come in and just audit your materials. That is not the division I'm with. I'm with a more specific division that does something a little bit different. But our job is to make government work better. And we do that through transparency, the audits. And if we find fraud, waste, or abuse, we have to expose that to the people. So as we go through that, talking about fraud, waste, and abuse, that's my focus. I don't come to your office and do an audit. If you have a question about what form do I file, I have no idea. If I get an allegation of fraud, waste, or abuse, we're going to show up and take whatever it is we have to take under the statutes of audit to get it and look at it. So a little different role, and it's very specific. We have different ways to report those allegations. Sometimes it's internal, sometimes it's a hotline, it's anonymous. We don't know who makes these allegations a lot of times, and we couldn't disclose it if we did. The statutes don't allow it. So once you make an allegation, or if you see something that looks like fraud, waste, or abuse, that's how you trigger our division. Every single allegation, there may be, I think we average somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 to 300 per week that come in for fraud, waste, and abuse, and that's all year long. And we triage and look through every single allegation. Every one of them by statute has to be monitored, reviewed to see if we need to open it or assess it. So it's a lot. There's honestly way more than I thought there was when I took this job. It's a really large number. And I was asked to mention this just to bring it around to TAUD and the utilities. And I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but in DOI, my division, I think we're around 60 some million that we've exposed since 2016 or 17. And over half of that the money difference comes from utilities. Which is kind of a staggering number, but there's a lot of utilities. So if we've exposed 64 million, at least 30 some of that has come from utility services. That's just my division. So again, that doesn't speak to audit or another group. That's just us, what we found so far. This is kind of how we're set up. This did not used to be the case. We used to have investigators that worked all across the state. So you might work in Memphis. Shouldn't be. They're both off. No? Maybe it's just interference. I'll let them over here. So what would happen is an investigator might get a call and they tell them, okay, you got to go to Memphis today. So they're in Memphis, and then the next allegation comes from Sullivan County, and you got to be there tomorrow. That was very inefficient. That didn't work well. So we're now split. So if you kind of see yourself up on the map, you can see the 4 colors. That's our Upper East, Mid East, Middle, and West region. So when I first started with the Comptroller, I had the purple and kind of bluish color. I was upper and mid, and then another attorney covered the other. When I moved to the chief position, so I have the whole state now. And then we have would have been Emily, but she left me, and I'm still angry at her for that. Um, she had the purple and blue region. So the good thing about this is you have somebody you can call, you have somebody you can develop that relationship with. Instead of trying to learn 38 investigators, you're only really having to learn 4 people because each region has a deputy chief you can contact if you have a question, if you're involved in something. So that's kind of how we're set up. And then you see the district attorneys general for each one of those. We also do have our own forensics team, just like TBI has. We can download computers, we can pull things, even when people have deleted things. We can go, we've actually done that several times lately. They've deleted things. We go back and find. I've actually seen messages where they're talking, a person was talking to their mom, and mom was telling them how to delete the computer so that we couldn't find what was on it, which was kind of interesting that he and his mom had this big, long conversation, screenshots from Google. We were able to pull all that up. So I don't know how they do it, but they come in and say, oh, look, check this out. And we've got all kinds of emails and text messages. So just because it's deleted doesn't mean it's deleted. So fraud, waste, and abuse, everybody kind of knows the general definitions of this, but intentional deception that violates a law or public trust, that's our big one. We do address waste and we do address abuse, but the number one allegation by far that comes in is some sort of fraud, whether that be theft, conflict of interest, which for you guys, that's going to be one we'll touch on a little bit because it seems to be one that occurs a lot where you maybe have a commissioner who, we decided, do we need to do a utility project, and the commissioner owns the company that gets it. Did we properly disclose that? Was that made aware to the commission? Did they vote on that? We see that pretty frequently. Um, we'll delve into that a little bit more, but there are some remedies. Even if you don't get prosecuted, a lot of people don't realize you can be sued by the district attorney general civilly, and they can recover every penny you took from that job. So you end up losing money. If you did a $20,000 job and made $5,000 on it, they sue you for the full 20,000 if you fail to comply with the conflicts of interest statute. So a lot of people don't realize a DA can sue you, but they can. Doesn't happen often, but it can. Abuse, that one's a little bit unique. We tend to see abuse more with really just, I mean, it's kind of common sense, but abuse of their position. Are they doing things that just exceed their authority? Are they going beyond what they're allowed to do? So for example, a mayor, I think I had a mayor in a case that he decided to fire all of the volunteer fire department people, which he didn't have authority to do. And then he ultimately appointed a new chief who, after a little bit of investigation, turned out to be a sex offender, and he can't go work fire calls. So you kind of see what happens with the abuse of your power. That's the sort of thing that comes in. I don't know whether he knew that when he hired him, but that's what we get into with the abuse. It's more of an excessive authority, doing things you really don't have the potential to do. And sometimes for your all's work, it could be telling a customer, yeah, I can do that, or we can make that happen when your position doesn't actually allow you to do that. And then waste is more obvious. I think I saw one, this has been several years ago. One utility had more P cards, credit cards, than they did employees. So they had like 100 employees and had 121 P cards. There was a lot of waste. I mean, there was a lot of iWatches, phone covers, you name it, car washes. I mean, it was just all across the board. It was like personal credit card city. And of course, there's no records of anything, so it's really hard to tell. Was all that for the benefit of the utility? Probably not, but you got 121 cards and only 100 people. Who has them? There's no way to know. They weren't assigned by name, so they could just scan them. So the examples I'm going to go through, again, I've taken the names out. They're very brief little summaries, but I'm going to tell you about briefly about the scheme and what they did, but then we'll talk more about how this may seem little, but it might be bigger to tell your people how to look for. So we're going to talk about misappropriation of money and time. This one's very common, and it's probably one of the biggest ones we see. So we had a clerk, and by the way, some of these are utilities, some of them are problems we see in utilities, but these examples were easier to talk about. So we have a clerk who took over $400 in 1 year by pocketing cash collections, and she concealed it by falsifying documentation. So $400 in the big grand scheme of things, in my world, that's a misdemeanor. That means I'm bothered by it. I'm a little bit worried about it, but it's $400 over a year. Did somebody come up on hard times? Did they make a mistake? Well, when you look at what this clerk did, if somebody came in and paid cash, if they asked for a receipt, she would give them a receipt and document it. But they also had a not drop box, so nobody's there to ask for a receipt. And any customer who did not ask for a receipt did not get one. And so she just took the cash and never logged that she collected it. Not a lot of money. The problem was the people that this was a utility, the people that did not get their money credited started having their utilities shut off pretty quickly. And $400 is not big in theft world. People not having water utilities becomes a really big deal to them in a really short period of time. So we get called, and here we go. $400 is an A misdemeanor, which means it's punishable by up to 11 months, 29 days, probably on probation. You pay the money back and you get a fine. The problem was she faked some of the documentation. She lied in the system about who paid and who didn't. So she was like, this is not that big a deal. It's only $400. I'll pay it back. The problem is when you start messing with those documents, that's tampering with a government record. It's forgery. Because I don't know how to show hands. I thought for a long time, even as an attorney, that forgery meant I had to sign your name without permission. The statute actually just says filing anything false into a book or record is a forgery, and it grades like theft, so it can be even higher than an E felony. So, and she also would have gotten an throughout the presentation. So she exceeded her authority. She had no authority to take that money. That's not a benefit she's entitled to, and she benefited herself with it. That's an E felony that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but it will cost you your whole state retirement. You cannot get judicial diversion for that. I don't care if you've worked 29 years, it's gone. So it is a really impactful charge. So people think these little small, even if I get caught, I'm going to get an A misdemeanor. It's not that big of a deal. It actually can, because she was looking at 3 felonies, and the A misdemeanor, just all I needed the A misdemeanor for was just to prove the other 3 felonies. And we had her, she confessed to that, by the way. So the way that, and just while we're talking about our specific division, make clear we are not law enforcement. We're just auditors with very specific training to do investigative audits. So we don't arrest people, we don't charge people, we can't handcuff people. They can confess to killing Jimmy Hoffa, and I can do absolutely nothing about it. I can go report on it, but I can't do anything. So people tend to talk to us, and they're very forthcoming because we typically have the records anyway. But she completely confessed, and then she's looking at all those charges. And her, I think her shock was, but it's only $400. How am I staring at 3 felonies, and one of them's going to take my whole retirement that I worked for? I think she had been there probably 20 years, so it's pretty impactful. So that was the first one. This next one it's kind of interesting. So we have another clerk, and this is something to really watch out for. She spent over $5,000 in 7 months. Again, not a huge amount of money, but you catch it and you start seeing what she bought. She was over their IT department. She was kind of over requisitions. So she's trying to buy equipment. I probably should have put the pictures in here. She bought some really nice brand name like purses and things like that. But then when she would go to the document, she would list it as, and she would put the brand name. So like Louis Vuitton utility bag, laptop holder. I mean, she logged it into their system, but guess who did the approvals for these purchases? She did. So she can put in the requisition, she can approve the purchase, and then she had the authority to approve the payment on the back end. So one person from front to back has all the authority. And she did this all throughout. And the cool thing, she also got all that stuff tax free because she would use the utilities tax exemption number to buy the stuff. So we went and talked to her. And the funny thing is, when we talked to her about some of these purchases, she's like, well, I don't have this stuff here at the office. It's at my house. And she actually went and got it and brought it back, and it had all her personal effects in it. So again, another easy one. Now, theft over 5, that's going to get you to a D felony. So that's 2 to 4 years with a felony. The same charges for the other stuff all still apply. The official misconduct, the theft, the forgery, because clearly that was not a utility bag. One of them was a big giant picnic bag that was like a cooler system. I mean, she bought all kinds of stuff, and it was all camouflaged in the system. So that's where we got the extra charges. And to go back to my DA world, a lot of times they will charge the best charges, but in some of these, you charge everything. Every one of those crimes, it's like, well, am I really going to be guilty of all those? Well, every one of those that have different elements. Forgery requires false statements into a book or record. Tampering with government record is the same thing, but you have to prove it's a government record. Theft is the unlawful taking of something without consent. So you can charge all of those. So yes, you can be convicted of all 4 felonies at the same time. They may dismiss a couple of them if you're nice and you plead guilty, but that's just how that works. So all these charges, even for these small amounts, are all on the table. So you may get an indictment and be brought in the paper where your mugshot, where they've picked you up for stealing the Louis Vuitton utility bag, which I've never seen in the catalog. And she did have to pay back the tax exemption as well. One thing to watch out for there, though, is on your tax exemptions, when an employee goes rogue, you don't have any records of why they did what they did. It doesn't happen often, but the IRS, you're really going to have to keep up with what happened, and you're going to have to show why this happened. Because if you abuse that tax exemption too much, there can be penalties. I don't know exactly what they are. I know in the world of nonprofits, for example, they can actually take away your nonprofit status for a certain amount of time. So it's something that's really important. This employee clearly went outside the bounds, but at the same time, I think this one actually wasn't a utility, but they had left her in charge of everything. So they didn't have a good look because they made her in charge of the whole thing, and nobody was reviewing any of these purchases. Nobody would, I mean, the whole purchasing department just went with whatever she put in there. So this was never looked at until it was uncovered. And I don't remember how we found out about this one. I think finally somebody noticed that the headphones and cell phone cases, she had bought 146 leather cell phone cases for phones that the utility didn't even use. And that's what tripped somebody off, because they're like, we don't use this brand of phone, it won't fit. So what she did with those, we don't know. We assume she probably sold them. They weren't super expensive, but 136, it was over $1,000 in cell phone cases. But just to give you an example. So this next one, this is where it starts to get a little bit more complicated for those of you who may supervise people who turn in time. This is a situation where a clerk got promoted. She started out in a position where she could accumulate comp time, and she accumulated about 74 hours of comp time, gets promoted. They let her keep the comp time, but she's no longer allowed to get comp time. So what she starts doing, that she's such a good employee, they've promoted her. They also put her over timekeeping for all the other employees, including herself. So nobody reviews her time. She just reviews everybody else's time. So she cashes in that 78 hours that she had built up. But then she also starts giving herself extra annual time, and she gives herself extra sick time. So what she would do is in 1 week, she would claim 80 hours, 40 hours worked, 40 hours of annual, and then she would put 40 hours of sick leave. Well, there's a problem with that. You can't do all three of those in 1 week. So she got paid for 120 hours in 1 week, but obviously that doesn't work. And she was able to do this and get above $6,000. And she was actually questioned. And this is where, for those of you I say that are supervising, once you see this, it's like, what do we do? Because she gave answers. She actually built up that. When they first caught it, it was only around $2,000. But she gave explanations that they were like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Because she would tell them, well, I brought that time over, I have to cash it out, or I'm going to lose it. None of that was true. It was all in their handbook. You couldn't do that. But she was very convincing. They're like, okay, that's fine. And so it was a little bit harder to prosecute, because once they give the authorization for that, it's much harder for me to say you took something without authorization. They have now okayed something that's unlawful. So I can still do it, but it makes my life a whole lot harder on the prosecutor side. So be aware of that, because what you don't want to get into is a situation where you become the key witness about how all this happened and you had it right in front of you. It takes a little bit of extra time. And again, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but this one should have been pretty obvious that even if she was allowed to cash in time and do these things, you couldn't do 120 hours in 1 week, because she still turned in annual time and sick time and work time all together. It wouldn't have worked that way. So this one's a little bit simpler. But it took a little more time. It was actually broken into $2,000 segments. So 2,000 was for the annual, 2,000 was for the sick, and then 2,000 for just time she didn't work, but she claimed she did. So, because she actually at one point on 1 week turned in 80 hours of annual leave, even though she'd already been through the 78. She just gave herself a new 80 that came out of thin air. So she ended up in just a matter of a few weeks going through probably 300 hours of time that she never accrued and wasn't even entitled to accrue. And what was bad is the person who caught this was the one who actually told her that she could not accumulate any more time. And then she explained how she could do it. And the person's like, okay, that's fine. And went on with it. So it ended up getting a little bit more. And again, on the criminal charge side, what can happen here? It's the same thing. It's theft of it was true. It's all false. She never had any of that time. It's just made up in her head, and it's now a part of a government record that somebody's going to see. So it's false. So she gets charged for that. She also gets charged again for the official misconduct. So however much time she's got built up, all the felonies are going to take it away. And with official misconduct, a lot of times you're going to have a really hard time getting another job, especially if you want to try to go back into government, because that one really sticks out. And all these crimes are what we call crimes of dishonesty. That's also very difficult. Who's going to put you in charge of money or merchandise if you've got thefts on your record? So again, $6,000 and compared to some of these I'm about to show you is not a lot of money, but the consequences are still very, very high. And it's something to keep in mind when your people are talking to you about. But I promise I have a good reason why I did it. They may have, but if I rob a bank today because I think I need the money, but then I don't need it and I take it back tomorrow, they're still going to get me for a federal offense of bank robbery. So you can't really undo what you've already done. And sometimes it's sad, and the DA may have mercy on you if something's going along, or you may have a good reason. So obviously, all these people are innocent until proven guilty, but this is just things that in my world is a little different than the auditor. The auditors are not thinking about what I'm thinking about with what this person's facing. They're just basically finding the theft. So wanted to kind of give it, this division did not always have this. So typically you would just see a report come out and it would talk about what happened. So now that's been changed a little. And how many of you have you all seen the public reports that come out from the investigation division? If you have not seen those, you can go to the Comptroller's website, just the homepage, and go to divisions and investigations and find an investigation. They're all there. They're public. So anything we've ever investigated, I think going back to 16 or 17 maybe, is on there and you can read it. It's required that we make that public. So that's the other thing about all these. If you get criminally charged, we do not do criminal investigations. We go look at an agency. So if it's XYZ Utility District, the title of that report's going to say investigative report XYZ Utility District. But we will name the person who was criminally charged. And we do that for a couple of reasons. One, sometimes the utility or whoever might have been the one to report that, and we want people to know this person went way outside the scope. Nobody at that utility told them to do this. So it's our only way to try to protect the entity a little bit and let them know this is a bad actor. You know, this is not the whole utility. This is what this person did. And then there'll be a charge box at the bottom that tells everything they were charged with. And there'll be an exhibit that has their actual signed indictments to it. So you'll see all that. But that's all made public. And that's part of the comptroller's responsibility to make this public. So if a DA decides that, you know, it's not that much money, this person was falling on hard times, even if they don't charge, that report's coming out. So your whole town is going to see it, hear about it. If they're not charged, we don't use names, but it's going to name the position. So it'll be the former director or the former clerk, the former whatever. And we'll put when they were terminated from their position or if they're still there. All that's there. So just be aware that the exposure is our role. Our job is to expose the fraud, waste, or abuse. So the lawyers still have a play in this. The DA still sees every case that we look at. That's just part of the requirement. But then the comptroller, his job is to make these findings public, unless and until we find out there's something. If it turns out an allegation is just false, you're never going to hear any more about it. It just goes quiet. So that's kind of how you know something. Either we couldn't prove it, or something just went wrong. But otherwise, you will see a report. It might be one paragraph. It might be 3 pages. I've had them as much as 23 pages. They get pretty long. So it depends on what we find. But that's kind of how the reports work. I should have probably talked about that first, but the DAs can then use that as part of their evidence at trial. So we get called as witnesses. So we testify at grand jury. The 3 attorneys that are our office, we can be cross-designated back in as special prosecutors. So sometimes we get to see it on both sides. I've actually got 2 right now, I think, that I'm designated on as a prosecutor. So a little bit interesting. Let's see. This one's really simple, but it's something to watch out for if you're in the oversight. We're still on time theft, but at this particular, I think this was a utility. We have a student worker of all people and a person who was overseeing the student worker for the summer. I'm not sure how this worked, where they had like a student. I don't know if it was somebody in college that was doing their grad work. I never could exactly figure out because I've never seen this before. But all they did was the supervisors oversaw his own time and this student employee's time. They just turned in time for $10,000 that they never showed up for work. And the only way it was caught is they went somewhere where they turned in that they worked somewhere, and the place, the entity that they were supposed to be working at, called the head manager and said, "I thought they were supposed to be here on Friday." Well, I've got that they were there, and they had video cameras, and we started to establish that they weren't there and hadn't been for weeks. And so we went and pulled all the video cameras, got all the footage. Every day they had turned in. I don't. we talked to them. They admitted to it. They had gone to lunch, or they would go play golf. They would go do whatever they wanted to, but they never showed up for work and then collected the $10,000. Of course, we've upped the level. Now we're to C felony, and you still get all those other charges. But think about being a student worker. I mean, you've not even started yet, and you've pretty much ended yourself. But this one is really hard for the ones of you that supervise. I mean, how do you always know where your people are? How are you going to go out there and just watch them every minute? But you have to be a little bit creative, I think, in how you catch this. We got fortunate. We had a good relation. Well, the company had a good relationship with that entity, and they called when they thought something was suspicious. And the entity that we worked with was actually really good, and they were worried about it and said that we got to figure this out. So both those people obviously lose their position. But by that point, though, they're already on the hook for C felonies. Again, all those things, official misconduct. So luckily, the student's not going to lose any retirement. He didn't have any yet, but he's probably going to lose any employment for the next several years. And we can come back to any. If y'all have questions, raise your hand at any point, and I'll try to answer what I can. This one, I've actually changed the title of this. This was not a utility director. This case, I worked this case. It's really interesting, and I'll give you a little bit of information that's really sad about it too. But when this happened, we have a person who the entity she did work for, and I've seen the same scheme at a utility, but this fact pattern was so terrible. But she had done a really good job. They had promoted her to be the director of this agency, and she began to take a little bit of money, but nobody really knew how because everything checked out. There were receipts for everything. There were invoices for every single one of those plus $1 million purchases. I mean, we had every invoice, all of them signed, dual signatures. So all these things were in place to try to prevent this from happening. And by the way, they had no money left. This place, it bankrupted them. So they had to go through insurance processes and all that. But what we started looking into, the invoices were there. They were all accounted for. Her books were good. There was nothing wrong with them. It just turns out she made a couple of mistakes. She billed invoices to companies they regularly used, but they weren't real. None of the work actually happened. She took a copy of their real invoices, made her own, and would list jobs that they had done because they would handwrite in on their invoice, and be careful about this. Like if they said installed new water line on the invoice, it was always in handwriting. And so she caught on to that. She would make a copy of their receipt, create another one, and just write a different job or write something else. None of this stuff was done. All of them were fake. Then I guess she got a little bit more confident. We found over 130,000 of those were for companies that didn't even exist. They're not real. They're just ghost companies. She just decided this is going to look too bad if I keep doing the same companies over and over again. So she just created false companies. And if you called the phone number to find out if it's real, guess who you got? You got her or somebody else that would say, oh, yeah, we're real. We did that work. So it was really clever. It went on for a long time. This went on for multiple years, like 4 to 5 years before anybody, well, when they ran out of money, they noticed it. But that's how that happened. So 300 false invoices. And then we started looking, we went and talked to the people. All of those were signed, but it turns out she was actually a pretty good handwriter. They had never signed any of those. She was signing their names. So she would sign her name as a signatory and then pick a random commissioner thing. Looked, if you presented these at a local board meeting, it's going to be really hard to tell. This one was really, really difficult. So we actually had to go to the board members, find out, is this your signature? And once we started looking at it, it wasn't as good as when you first glance, but if you just took a glance, you wouldn't know. And this is one of the key things to take away from this. The one thing they did not do, and you're going to notice this throughout, they would go to board meetings and she would turn in the financial statements. Nobody ever took 15 minutes to call the bank and get the real ones. They trusted the statements she turned in. They were also fake. She just scanned them in, made her own, made it look like they still thought they had like $1 million in the bank account because they were looking at financial statements, but they weren't the real ones. Nobody ever got the real ones from the bank. If they had, they would have known, oh, wait, we have like $200 in the bank. This one was going to be a huge criminal prosecution. We're talking a felony theft. You cannot get probation. You're talking 12 to 20 years in prison, all kinds of other things. I mean, you're never going to get that money back. She didn't have any of it. The interesting thing about this one that's kind of sad is because nobody ever wants to see this happen. Before she got charged, she died. I think it was I think it was ruled a suicide. I'm not sure. it was never something that this should have happened for, but she did not get charged because of that. Really sad situation. The interesting thing from my point though, I never found, or we never found a single dollar of where that went. No new house, no new car, no no gambling debt. We couldn't trace it anywhere. It had all been cashed. Every one of these transactions, she would take the check and cash it. She had 2 kids, I think. They never got anything new. I don't know where it went. So if you're thinking about, well, we'll just try to get restitution, things like that. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But they didn't even have enough insurance to cover this kind of theft. So it can be very devastating to your agency if this kind of thing happens. And this is a tougher one. It just I tell people I cannot give legal advice, but it's really not that time consuming to have somebody on the board. Just be responsible for get a copy of the real bank statement. The new scanners and what you can do on a computer is so good. And by the way, this is not the only scheme. I have another one in another county, same exact scheme. Only she was a clerk, and she would take their court costs, fees, fines, every bit of that money. She took it, and even like restitution. So if a defendant if I got convicted of stealing from your house, and I came into court and I'm doing what I'm supposed to, I'm paying restitution to the court. She was stealing that too, so the victims weren't even getting their money back. And we were about 200,000 on her. We found, and then when we sat down and talked to her, the first this is where it's kind of fun to do this job. But when we found the 200,000, they couldn't make payroll, same as these people. That's how they found out they had no money. They thought they had about $800,000 in the bank, but the checks bounced. So we sat her down, and before we could say anything, she looks at us, goes, "Well, I knew this day was coming." And we're like, "Well, okay." And so we asked her just out of curiosity, because we'd only been about, I think we'd made our way through about 2 years of records, and it was 200 and some odd thousand. And we said, "Where do you think you are on how much you've taken?" Just kind of a curious question, because I figured she'd say about 20 or 25. She said probably 7.25, 750. And so we had to go out in the hall and figure out, we got to go get more records. And she was pretty dead on. I mean, she was within about $10,000 of what she had taken. She's now doing 15 years in prison. But people lost their jobs. It was really devastating to the community. Again, they didn't have enough insurance to cover 720. They didn't have enough of anything. So they actually ended up having to raise taxes in that town to cover part of the theft. So that's the kind of impact that, again, if somebody had taken the time to maybe look at the real bank statements, because she was really sophisticated. She had I can't remember what the computer program was. She would scan it in, again, do the same thing. And what got her caught, on the bank, the numbers always line up a certain way. She was a quarter of a space off on one number. And we were able to find that quarter of a space and be like, this is not real. We knew they weren't real, but we were just trying to figure out, how do we prove it to her? So the external auditors, they do test work. And so they reviewed everything that was in that file, and everything checked out because the financial records in the file were the ones she created. Nobody ever turned any real bank statements in. So that's how she got by the auditors. And again, that's something we've taught on that with the auditors, to tell them to watch for, because these were actually full in color. They didn't look like copies. They looked like originals. I mean, they were, if she had used her talent for good, I don't know what she could have done, but she was really good. I mean, she was clever and very open and admitted to it. I mean, she would tell us, I've forgotten how long it would take her to make one of these. She would spend hours to make one bank invoice, because that's how long it took to get all those numbers to line up. She even somehow found the font. She did research and found out what font that the bank used so that she could match the font exactly. And she told us all this. I mean, we found out. So she was cooperative, told us what happened, pled guilty. Like I say, she's doing 15 years. Interesting story about the one this is not on the screen, but um, it's the only time I think I've ever been at a hearing where somebody got sentenced and the judge fussed at them for not only stealing, but what they did with the money. All 700,000 was spent at Walmart, Target, Dollar General. It was just stuff. I mean, she blew through $750,000 on nothing. And the judge, I think, at one point told her, "I would have been happier about this if you'd at least bought a beach house or something." I mean, I've never heard a judge actually fuss at what somebody bought, but that's what she spent $750,000 on, just random gadgets from Walmart, and the town suffered. So not a utility, but same scheme as you see here. Obviously, something that anybody that your finance person can do if there's not an oversight. That's where that person, one person should not be doing all this. That's where the commonality between all these schemes. They took the money, they deposited the money, they provided the bank records to the board meetings. Nobody else was looking. So that's how they were able to do it. And of course, guess who the auditors talk to when they come in? The finance person, who is the same person that knows about all this. So they tend to help direct you in a different way. So that's kind of how you pull this off. But this one went on, this one was about 4 years. The one I was just talking about in the clerk's office, I think that one was about 5.5 years that she did it before. Well, of course, she had to stop. They ran out of money. So this one's a little bit different. And we're getting into the services now. So this is where for specifically for utilities, because you kind of have a two-step process. You've got the money that comes in for utility. It's easy to see how we steal the money, but what do you do when you have somebody who actually starts taking the equipment or using it to do their own stuff? So in this one, you have a manager who decides to put a roof on his house, all with shingles bought for the utility. Um, there was concrete work done. All this was done, by the way, with utility equipment, utility money, poured the concrete at a commissioner's house. Now, the commissioners sometimes know this is happening, sometimes they don't. They just think the manager has a contact and helps them out. Other times, the commissioners actually do know and they shouldn't be doing that. So it depends on the pieces of equipment to do it. Again, this person is overseeing the purchases. He's overseeing what's going on. So no, what I want done, I want my house done first. The shingles were ordered for the utility, but then when they talked to the roofer was specifically instructed, you need to go to my house and put those shingles on first. And then on the back end, you get all kinds of different stories and things like that. The garage is another big thing we see a lot. The garages are used all the time. I mean, you could probably start like a hot rod shop or something, show car place in these garages because we find them all the time. Old Cadillacs, and I can think of three right now that I've seen high dollar cars just in there being worked on for using utility equipment, utility people. If there's no utility truck to service, then you're in there getting your brakes put on your 1955 Chevy by the utility workers, and you guys are paying for it. So are your ratepayers. So the liability is another thing there to watch out for. This is going back to the legal world. If something happens to that car or to that employee while they're not working on their own job, can they sue? If they've been told to do it, possibly. They got hurt doing something they shouldn't have been doing to start with. That's a little bit outside of my world. I don't do civil anymore, but it's something you have to think about as you're going through this. That's things that are going to impact the people who are left behind. This did end up in criminal charges. This person pled guilty at the end of the day on this and is no longer in that position, which I think is probably a good thing because it was going to continue. And something to watch out for when it is a manager, it's very difficult. I mean, we work this cases because there's a lot of employees. They have a lot of power. They have a lot of authority. And in this case, it was a good example of how difficult it can be for the people working under somebody who's doing this. They know it's going on, but they have bills to pay too. So everybody kind of has to be observant and see what's going on. And thankfully, some people called and reported this, and we were able to catch it. But there was a lot of fear going on, and there's two of these mixed together, but one of these there was a lot of fear from the employees from this person because of what might happen if they cooperated or told us what happened. Luckily, we were able to find all this out with really very little from the people there, but it very easily could have been something that slid through the cracks if we hadn't had outside people help us that said, yeah, I helped with that job. I know exactly what was going on with that, or I delivered that piece of equipment to that job site. Um, might have gotten by with it and still be there and kind of hoarding over these people. And I think this one, I can't remember what the charges. I think it was theft and official misconduct were on the table. And there was another person that helped with this that was charged as well. I think they later got theirs dismissed for cooperating with us to help get the main character. This one's more this is becoming really common for us now. And again, it's a smaller number, but it's something to watch out for. We're seeing people all the time now that are going around with a gas card and they just fill up their own cars. And it's kind of cool how this one got caught, but he was assigned a big diesel utility truck. And they kept seeing that purchases were made by a P card, a fuel card, for an employee who was not working those days. So he had one of his supervisors' P cards and would go on that guy's days off. And unfortunately for him, we found a gas station that took pictures when you fueled up. And we found where he was bringing these big plastic jugs and filling them all up with gasoline, but his truck was diesel. And the utility told us, like, we don't have any of those plastic jugs. Every piece of equipment we have is diesel. We don't have anything. So it wasn't real hard. And of course, when we sat him down, he's like, no, that's for my truck. It's for the equipment. We're like, well, you bought regular fuel because we had the receipts. He's like, okay, you got me. So here's what I was doing. And actually, his story was really good. His girlfriend loved to go cruise, like Walmart, cruise around, and he didn't have the money to buy gas for his car. So he was taking those jugs home and filling up his car so they could go cruise around. But he got charged again, felony. Um, I think he got official misconduct as well. So he'll now lose his retirement and all that good stuff, just like all the other people. But again, not a large amount of money, but the consequences are pretty significant. Um, some things we are seeing on the cards is people changing them. If you assign a card to a vehicle or whatever, it's something somebody probably needs to keep a check on. The supervisor in this case, I actually felt kind of bad for. He had allowed this guy to use that card while he was training him. So they were working together. He just forgot to get it back from him whenever the training stopped. So the guy just had it. He had his own card, but he had his boss's too. So he did it, and it looked like because we went in trying to question his boss, like, where are you buying all this fuel? He's like, I don't even have my card. And so that's when we traced it down. So not very hard to catch, but it happens a lot. I mean, this one's I'm trying to think. I wouldn't say that it's, half of our cases, but it's becoming a bigger issue that we're seeing all across the state. Pick any one of those color regions you want to, we're seeing that. And then we go to the failure to provide oversight. These are things you're going to see in our reports. We've talked about kind of the fun criminal side of what people get charged with. It's not fun if you're the criminal, but this is the stuff you're going to see about the entity, because these are the things that tend to stem how these people are able to accomplish this. So management didn't provide oversight regarding actual hours. That's where you put the same person over time. They're over everybody else's time, but they're also over their own time. Whoever's overseeing everybody else's time probably shouldn't be doing their own, because they just check off whatever they want to. So that's one. If we see that probably helps somebody contribute to a time theft, because there's just they know nobody's looking at it. The second one, the board didn't sufficiently oversee projects management's decisions. That goes back to the services. When you're using equipment, buying equipment, the board has no idea this piece of equipment was bought. They have no idea it was sent to a different job site. I mean, if anybody had looked at those receipts, it probably would have come to light a little bit sooner, because why did we need a second one of these pieces of equipment? It doesn't make any sense. We didn't vote on it. How did this happen? So that's just kind of the board's a little bit asleep at the wheel there on those situations. So it's things to just kind of heighten your awareness of, because there's consequences to the board too. If you're too negligent in your responsibilities, I think there's agencies like T-Board, there's things like that where the board can be called in to see why are you not fulfilling your role as a board member. This is serious. This is not something that we just do because we tell people we're on the utility board. There actually are things we have to watch for. And I think that's something, as more of these utility cases pile on, that's another thing that unfortunately is common. I think we have a lot of board members that have maybe good intentions, but they're not really aware of what to look for. Or in the small towns like where I come from, you just know the manager so well, you trust them. You just trust them implicitly. And that's kind of what happened with some of those that I showed you today. They had so much trust. Even the $1 million one, I sat there and watched a town commissioner cry because he had walked her down the aisle at her wedding. He just, no way she would steal. No way she would steal anything. So the trust took the responsibility away. It's like, I don't need to watch that person. They would never do this. And so that's just something from the criminal world that, again, this is not advice. It's just something to be aware of, that in a situation like that, and you never know, if somebody really needs money, trust or not, they may do what they do. And sometimes there's desperate times, and that's why they do it. Um, Not accounting for the consumable assets, that goes back to the fuel. I gave you one example where a guy went to gas stations. I have another one where a guy went to the local fueling station that the county owns, and he was filling up his Peterbilt 18-wheeler that he had a side business for every night. That's what he was doing. So if they had checked, because he was using so much diesel fuel, if anybody had been doing an inventory, they would have realized we don't burn through that much diesel. But he had a separate trucking business, and he would just go in at night after dark. And we actually, that one got clever. We got some help from law enforcement to put up trail cams, and we caught him coming in there at night, just filling up the Peterbilt, both sides. It was a lot of fuel. So that's another one where you kind of have to do inventory, do your checks. Again, people are kind of like, why don't you trust me? Because that's my job's to oversee, not to trust. That's kind of where that comes from. And then failed to properly oversee district operations. That that's just kind of that's just a broad one you're going to see in a lot of these where if it's more than one person, if it's a complete breakdown, you're going to see this. If the manager wasn't looking at the employee and the board wasn't looking at the manager and it's just a complete lack of oversight, you're going to see this on those. So that's going to be the deficiencies that go to the entity, not the person who broke the law. Those are still probably going to be in the report to explain how was this person able, to your question, how'd they get by with it for 4 years? Because of this. This is typically how it happens. And then this is more what you'll see in an actual report. And we'll talk about the prompt detection. I mean, even if somebody does steal, it's better to catch it at 100,000 instead of 1,000,000 or 10,000 instead of, they're just going to. Nothing I'm telling you today, everybody in here knows that's not going to stop it. I've been at a DA's office. I don't care how many cases you prosecute, there will be another one. These are just things to watch out for so you can try to catch it quickly because it's the agency we're trying to protect. This is, for me, this is not just about putting people in jail or prosecuting people. We want to prevent this. And if it does happen to you, we want to mitigate it so that I'd rather catch it at the $400 amount than it be 4,000. That's my goal. So these are just things hopefully that can help you see what the consequences are, not just how we find people doing stuff. These are just 4 really quick ones. I won't bore you with them. Separation of duties. Again, almost all of these had a component where one person had complete authority over all of it, whether it was intake of money, deposits, reporting to commissioners or boards. There was no separation. Um, Supporting documentation. That's another big one. You see all these credit card purchases, like the big utility I told you with 120 P cards, but only 100 employees. There's no documentation. All I could find was what the credit card purchased. I don't know who did it, where, I mean, I know where the card was used. I don't know how they got the card. I don't know who issued them the card. You really should have good documentation because that's how you can protect yourself the best. I mean, that's how you establish, was this for a utility purpose? If you think, well, I think I used that for this job we did, how do you know? I mean, how many things are purchased through some of these utilities? It's massive amounts because you all have huge operations over big counties and tons of customers. So it's a lot of work to do that. And we get that, but it can really be helpful on the back end and to protect you guys. Regularly review the documents. That's the one I talk about the most, the original. Get the bank statement. If it's one of those financial things you're not sure about, don't rely on something that somebody gave you. It's too easy just to call the bank and get a real one and say, oh, wait, we have $5,000. Why does her document say we have $125,000? I mean, you can see that that's a really quick way to catch something. It's also a way to catch something promptly because the first time they steal, the numbers don't match. Even if they're just $500 short, you can catch it very quickly if you do it that way. And honestly, that's how we catch a lot of these on the back end. We can track how they're stealing every month. Because if you look at the real statements versus what they turned in, it's really easy to figure out where they're taking it from. It's just a matter of what did they use it for at that point. So that's a really good way to catch stuff quick. And I think it's a deterrent. This is just personal opinion. This is not legal advice. If they know you're going to pull the real bank statements, are you as likely to go create fake ones? Because you're going to get yourself caught really fast. And even if you haven't stolen, if you've stolen $5, that's still going to be an official misconduct and a forgery and a tampering. You've got 3 felonies on you just for basically trying to do it. So there's a lot of deterrent with that. And then the 2 signatures on checks. Obviously, there's a way to defeat that if you've got somebody who's really good signing, like the one clerk I told you about. But typically that works pretty well because somebody will know they didn't sign it. Even if somebody tries to pull that, they're going to be able to figure out, I'm not signing anything for that job. So 2 signers is great, but it's also good to verify. Make sure that somebody's actually signing those things. Somebody in the purchasing should be looking at that just to try to catch it. And I know everybody has different number of staff too. Not everybody has 50 positions that can review all this, and I understand that, but these are just helpful little tips of things we see. This is just the reporting requirements. If you see unlawful conduct, that's got to be reported to the comptroller's office within reasonable time. The statute says reasonable time is within 5 days. That's just kind of the standard. The court kind of comes up with those definitions of what reasonable time is. That's where that comes from. And you see what unlawful conduct means: theft, forgery, credit, debit card fraud, any other act. And you'll also see it says reasonable belief. It doesn't say you have to have proof. It doesn't mean you have to investigate this to the nth degree and go put yourself in any kind of danger. It's just if something doesn't look right, you've got a real bank statement and it doesn't match, that may be reasonable suspicion to you that you need to turn that over and let somebody look at it. So that's the reporting requirements. And then you've probably seen this at all the buildings everywhere. That's the standard thing. I will tell you that reporting comes in, there's 3 different ways. You can call, and there's actually a person who answers every one of these calls or will call back. There's also an anonymous website you can go to, and it doesn't, you can choose to put your name in, what your position is, or you can choose to do it anonymously. And if it's anonymous, I can't see who you are. I don't know who you are. I just know that I've got an allegation that I may need to look at. So, and then the third way is if you have a contact with our office, somebody in audit, you can pass it through them and sometimes they'll come bring it to us. But it's really important we get those quickly. That way we can try to get in there and stop something before it gets too big. And that's the website that I was telling you about. When you get to when you go to the comptroller's website and you see the divisions at the top, when you say investigations, if you click that find investigation, it'll bring up all the old ones we've ever done, all that stuff I was telling you about. And I've got a couple up here. These are old ones, but if anybody wants to see what they look like, I'll show them to you after it's over. They're just little reports, but you can see everything. The mapping comptroller investigations, you can actually go look and see where all of our investigations are going on right now. You won't be able to see what they are, but you'll be able to see where we have open investigations. And we probably run, I would say, 150 to 175 open investigations all the time across the state. It's a lot more than what you would think, and those range from a booster club to a utility to a clerk's office to a mayor's office to a sheriff's office to a DA's office. It's anything across the spectrum. It's any kind of fraud, waste, or abuse. We have all those. So that's kind of where you can find that if you're interested in more uh, audit stuff, or if you just really can't sleep one night. And that's my contact information. If you have any questions, again, I can't provide legal advice, but anything I can do to help out, if it's investigations or if you need to make an allegation and you're not sure what to do, not sure who to call, you're welcome to call any of those numbers. And again, we changed those from Emily's to mine, so that should get you to me. But does anybody have any questions? It's kind of a sad topic. Nobody wants to be prosecuted these days. Let's see what we're at. How are we on time? Everybody good? All right. Well, thanks for having me. And again, I apologize for the short notice and the substitute. Emily's probably a lot better than I am, but if anybody has questions, you can get in touch with me later and I'll follow up with you. Appreciate it.